All right, guys, this is the Sony A7C II. If you already own this camera or even thinking about owning this camera, I'm going to go through all the best features, how to use them all, and there's some advanced features that are actually brand new for the A7C II, so we're going to break it all down. There are also a few weaknesses about this camera, so I'll show you how to get around all of them to really make the A7C II absolutely insane for you. And I actually just created an entire menu guide, which is available on my website and on Amazon as well, but it walks you through literally every item in this menu, how to use it in verbiage that you can actually understand, a bunch of tips and tricks on it, and really just helping you go to the next level with this camera. All right, so let's take a look at this. So this camera is identical pretty much. It looks very close to the original Sony A7C, but there are some big hardware improvements. So feature number one is going to be with the hardware. So compared to the original Sony A7C, we have a brand new custom function button. It's right up here by the menu button. But my favorite upgrade is actually going to be this. This is the exposure compensation dial, which I never used, is now fully customizable. So I'll break down like how I customize that in a second, but also the top dial right here. All of the video functionality used to live on this dial, but right now there is like a secondary switch to easily switch between photo, video, and S&Q, which is like a slow motion, quick motion is what it stands for. The only weird thing that I would say is if you shoot, for example, like an aperture priority in photo mode, but then you shoot manual mode for video, and you want to be switching between the photo and video mode, you actually have to switch twice. Now, I personally shoot in manual, so it's not really an issue for me, but if this is something that you deal with, there is a great solution to this. So up at the top, we have these three numbers, and these are going to be settings that you can store into the camera or custom function profiles. And there are three that you can store in the camera, but there are more that you can actually store on the memory card. The only issue is if you format the camera or format the memory card or then change the memory card, those go away. But there are three that are built into the camera, and we can set up custom profiles for them. So if you want an awesome way to really set up the camera to have anything customized for both photo and video, that's going to be a great way to do it. And that kind of brings us to feature number two, which is going to be customization. And this is going to be a big one. So let's really break this down. So the A7C II obviously had added that extra custom function button up at the top by the menu switch, but there are actually 8 custom buttons on this camera and 4 customizable dials, which is insane when you figure out how small and tiny this camera is. So by default, this dial on the top, which used to be the exposure comp dial, is programmable, but it is still set to exposure compensation. But one thing that's really cool is that even though I kind of leave it this way for photos, when I do video, I typically have manual white balance, and I typically set it in Kelvin. So I can actually program this dial to ride that Kelvin temperature. So as I'm recording, if I need to warm up my image or cool it down, I can actually dial it in. If the sun comes out or goes away, we can dial things in. And one thing that's even more amazing, so that's something that you can't do on pretty much any camera. However, combine that with another feature, and this one's called shockless white balance, which controls how quickly these white balance changes actually take effect. So if you turn this down to slow, then even when you rotate this dial and make those white balance changes, they happen very gradually, very naturally. So you don't even notice a change. This is really good for when you need to change your white balance while recording, and it's amazing. Now, the issue that you might have had already when you take a look at this is that the menu and customization that you can have on this camera, it gets extremely complicated very quickly. So that is why I created the entire menu guide going over literally every item in this menu. And it does it in ways that you can hopefully understand, because this camera's manual is not ideal for this. I also give you my advice for how to customize this camera, how I do it, a bunch of tips and tricks for everything and navigating the camera itself. I'll put a link in the description, because if you want to just really get to know the A7C II and take it to the next level, definitely pick this up. Now, if you want to actually customize and program these buttons, which how we set it up, then here's how we do it. So actually, again, I break this down in the course, but we'll go ahead and do it right here as well. So go ahead and hit that menu button, and you're actually going to go to the setup menu, which is going to be this very last one at the end. And then you're going to go to row 3. And this is where you have 3 different items that you can set for customizing every dial, every button, everything like that for both photo, video, and for playback. So this is something that Sony is great at because they really don't limit how many choices you have for how you customize your buttons and dials. And it's kind of an endless list. So I use this like crazy because it really helps you navigate the camera much quicker if you know what you're doing and when you kind of figured all of this out. But also there's just so many cool features that are buried in the menu, and when you can shortcut them to bring them out and use them very quickly out in the field, the camera just gets so much better. So number 3 for setting up his camera and the features that are going to be awesome is going to be sensor protection. Because I can't tell you how many times I have actually ruined an image or a video, especially because my sensor was dirty. And even if you clean your sensor before a shoot, you change your lens once and it's going to be over. And photoshopping dust, it's pretty easy for photos, unless you have to Photoshop like 1,000 images because you're shooting a wedding. And for video, it's going to be a nightmare. So the A7C II can actually close the mechanical shutter when the camera is off so that nothing can actually touch the sensor. Now keep in mind that your shutter is still a very fragile thing on the camera, so you don't want anything actually touching this as well. Now how you actually set this up is actually a little bit hidden. So you're gonna go down into that menu to that very last menu item, and you're gonna go to the menu number 13, and here you're gonna see the anti-dust function. This is where you're going to see that a shutter when powered off. And it does take like 3 seconds after you turn off the camera. So you'll turn off the camera, wait about 3 seconds, and then it's going to actuate and you're going to hear that shutter close. So give it a second when you turn off the camera before you actually remove the lens, but you'll actually hear that click of the shutter closing, and then it'll be a good time for a lens change. Now, next up is going to be photo frame rates. And this is going to be really interesting because if you thought that you could just throw this camera into a high-speed burst mode and actually get the maximum 10 frames per second, you're wrong. You can't. So this is going to be an important one to break down because this is really interesting. So the A7C II, and I also break this down in the course, so definitely check that out. But the A7C II, it can shoot 10 frames per second. There are just going to be 2 pretty big asterisks when you try and do this. The first is that you can only do it when you're in JPEG or compressed RAW. So if you are in uncompressed RAW or lossless compressed, you can't do this. It's also going to change your quality from a 14-bit RAW to a 12-bit RAW, so you will take a small quality hit. So if you do want the absolute best quality, you can still shoot compressed RAW, but ideally lossless compressed or uncompressed RAW, and keep the drive mode to medium or high. It's going to drop it to like 7 frames per second, but it's going to maintain the 14-bit RAW files, and then you're still going to get that live preview on your viewfinder, which just makes it a little bit easier to follow fast-moving subjects. Now we do need to talk about video because video is definitely one of the bigger attributes of the camera, one of the biggest upgrades of the A7C II. So now you can shoot 10-bit 422 video, and this is absolutely massive. It's just a huge step up, and it makes shooting log, which I highly recommend. You get a lot of dynamic range on it. You just have to know how to grade it, but it makes shooting it on this camera actually usable. And what I mean by that is that you could always shoot log video on even the Sony A7C or older Sony cameras, but a lot of the time it looked like crap when you graded it because we just didn't have as much color information from the 8-bit video on the older Sony cameras, so it couldn't handle the amount of processing that you really need to do to bring your files back to real life. So if you are shooting, especially if you're shooting log, just shoot 10-bit video, but I would honestly just shoot 10-bit video all the time because there is a pretty big quality difference. Now there are going to be 3 different formats for video as well. So I'm going to break it down in the guide as well, but there is XAVC HS, there is S, and there is SI. So HS is basically H.265 video, which is a more efficient file format, but it's more compressed. So you're able to get better quality in a smaller file size. Now the problem with that HS is that a lot of older computers, they couldn't handle that 10-bit 422 H.265. There just wasn't any hardware acceleration in those older processors. So you're gonna have some playback issues. You might, if you're on anything older than like a Mac M1 and PC, I believe it was like the 12th or 13th generation of Intel chips that added 10-bit H.265 422 support. So if you're on one of these newer computers, this is going to be great. I would use H.265 as HS, but if you're on older computers, probably just use 10-bit 420 color space, and you should be good, or you can use H.264. And that's a little bit more widely supported because that format's been around for a bit longer. Now you can also shoot this SI, and this is usually called Intra, and this just means that the camera is actually recording every frame individually, and it also uses up much less compression, and it edits a lot better on most computers. The thing that it takes away from is space. It takes up a lot of space to be able to shoot in this Intra format. Honestly, you're not going to really see a quality difference when you're shooting this, but if you are doing anything that needs better playback or frame editing, so if you're doing anything like CGI, even some color grading, like advanced color gradings or anything like that, where you might be tracking subjects, the Intra format is probably going to be your friend. You're just going to need to stock up on massive cards and drives because the file sizes are just massive. So the other thing that I want to talk about in video features is going to be oversampling, and this has 2 pluses and 1 minus. So one thing that's interesting, so we have a 33 megapixel sensor, which is a ton of resolution, and 4K video actually needs less than 12 megapixels depending on the aspect ratio. So basically this camera has too much resolution for video. Now the A7C II can oversample this video, which is kind of like layering pixels on top of each other and then combining them down. It gives you some of the most detailed, sharpest, cleanest video of any camera at any price, honestly. The other benefit to this is that we have an APS-C crop mode, and because we have so much resolution, if you ever need additional reach, you can activate that, and the camera still has more than enough resolution. So it actually has a 5K aspect of the sensor, and it will oversample that down to 4K. So even in the APS-C crop mode, you still have unbelievable quality, super clean, detailed video. Now, if you want even more crop, you can actually go into the menu, go into the video menu, down to item number 9, which is called zoom, go into zoom range and turn on clear image zoom. And now you can zoom another 1.5 times. This is actually going to take a little bit of an image quality hit because it is pushing further into the frame, but not as much as you would expect because we have so much resolution, even in the crop mode, we have more resolution than we need. You can actually use this feature with very little quality loss, which is really incredible. If you need the reach, it's an awesome camera to do this for. Now, unlike Canon, Sony doesn't give you the option of not shooting in this super high quality oversampled mode. So let's talk about overheating because it is pretty easy to overheat this camera. So other than just putting the camera in the shade, which I do find helps a lot, so do that. But you can also head to the menu, go to item number 9, and you will see the auto power off temp, which you need to switch to high. And this is going to allow the camera to heat up more before shutting down. So you can still overheat the camera. It just takes a lot longer. Now, technically, this might add some wear and tear to the sensor, and the camera itself might get pretty hot to the touch. So just a word of caution there. But I have overheated a lot of my cameras, Sony cameras, with this set to high. I've never had any sensor issues, and I've never burned myself, but the camera will get hot. So in my opinion, though, this is way better than having the camera shut off in the middle of the shoot. So it is something I recommend doing. Now, this next one is going to be really interesting because this is a feature. It's a new feature for Sony. It's on a few other Sony cameras, but not many. It's not on any other cameras that I know of. And it works better on this camera than most of those. So it is called auto framing. Now this is going to be for video, and basically if you're filming a talking headshot like this one right here, this shot could be using it. So the camera will use face tracking and the same face tracking of the autofocus system. It will crop into the frame and it will allow the camera to track you and kind of move throughout the frame as you're moving. And basically the camera is right now on a tripod, but it is tracking me around the frame. And this is a look I would go to all the time, but usually I would need a camera operator in order to get it. And now you can get it as a single camera operator just in front of the camera. Really easy to set up. Technically, you can do this kind of stuff in post, but I see a lot of use for just being able to do this straight out of camera. And this is a really, really useful way to do it. So in order to actually use this, you can head to the video menu down to the very last option, shooting option number 12, and then you're going to see your auto framing settings. So go ahead and turn this on, and then you can, usually I'll set it to the auto start, but you can actually have it switch between the tracked crop and then full frame, and you can have it switch every 15 or 30 seconds. So it's kind of like simulating a 2-camera shoot. And then when it comes to the crop level, I find the medium crop is the best option for this. Basically, you want to keep the camera quality high, but the more crop that you have, the more movement you have in the frame. But you do lose quality as you crop in more. So there's kind of that balance that you're trying to get from it. Now, another really massive upgrade, even when you compare this to more expensive Sony cameras, is the live streaming options, because this can actually function as a webcam over USB at up to 4K 30 frames per second, which is better than my high-end Sony cameras can do. So even if you're not a professional videographer, you're not using it for that, you can also use this just as a really good zoom camera, or if you do like live streaming or things like that, this is going to be great for that. And it allows recording at the very same time. So this feature alone just makes this one of the best webcams that you can buy, and it's built into the camera itself. So this next one, we're gonna do like a 3-for-1 in this one. So we'll call it features, but I'm gonna cram 3 really awesome features into this next one. So the first one is gonna be focused breathing, and this is gonna be for video. All of these are actually gonna be for video. It does use a small crop, and it will only work with Sony lenses, but basically all lenses have some kind of focus breathing on them, which means as you change focus or rack focus, the frame can also shift. So if you have a 35mm lens, it might be 35mm when you're focused at infinity, but if you focus on something maybe a few feet away or close focus it, the lens frame can actually shift so that it really looks more like a 40mm lens or a 45mm lens. So this is something that's really useful when you're rack focusing, but some lenses are even bad enough that even in my normal office studio, so my Sony 35mm 1.4 GM, I can't even use it in the studio without this setting, because just me moving like forward and backwards in the chair will shift the background frame so much that it just looks horrible. But if you turn this feature on, it works amazing. Another feature is going to be custom shutter speeds for managing flicker. So you can really dial in your shutter speed exactly to match your lighting if you're using artificial lights. But a really cool one is going to be around stabilization. So the camera itself has IBIS in it, so in-body image stabilization. It works all right. There's an active mode, which crops in a little bit, but makes it a whole lot better. But this camera can also, it does it automatically, records your gyro data. So basically all of the movement that your camera is physically doing, it's recording that into the video files. So in post, you can use this software from Sony called Catalyst Browse and do super accurate post stabilization. It is very time consuming, but if you have shaky footage that can't easily correct in post, which happens a lot of time when I'm out like doing boat shoots, for example, everything is moving in the frame. Water is moving, clouds are moving, I'm moving. So if you try and stabilize this in post, the camera doesn't know what's stable. There really isn't anything stable, so it just looks like jello. So this is a feature that you can use to stabilize everything in post. I don't use it all the time because it does crop in a bit into the frame. If you do have shaky footage, this can absolutely save you. Now, autofocus on this camera is absolutely stunning. Like, the tracking on this is amazing. Even in backlit environments, it has absolutely no problem locking on. And the touch focus integration is just, it's much better than before. But we need to talk about something new. So that is subject tracking. Because again, this is something where there are times where this is absolutely amazing, and then a lot of times where you need to turn this off. So if you head to the autofocus menu and you look at item number 3, subject recognition, then you will see these kind of subject tracking targets. So these work best when you want to focus on the main aspect of your subject, which for like humans, animals, and insects is going to be the eyes. There is a setting for cars and trains, which I think is focusing on the headlights, but it hasn't been super consistent. So I'm not exactly sure where it's focusing on. So if you're a portrait photographer or videographer, because all of this is going to work in video as well, and you want to focus on the eye in one of these like animals and people and insects, turn this on, because it is absolutely insane just how well this works. It is so much better at ignoring other objects that aren't the subject you're trying to focus on. And it is so good at analyzing the subject. So it's not just like randomly looking for an eye in the frame. It has to see a person, and then it knows exactly where the eye is going to be. And when the eye isn't there, it still knows where it should be. So even when my subject had a helmet on, it's spot on locked on the eye, which it couldn't see. It just knew where it was supposed to be. So the problem is when you don't want to lock on the eye. So maybe you're shooting portraits, but now you want to lock on the person's hand or hair or jewelry or a purse or anything like that. So even if you switch it to single autofocus and you put the point right on the purse that somebody is wearing, it's going to default back to the eye as long as it can see it in the frame. I shoot cars a lot, and I rarely use the subject tracking because most of the time I'm focusing on like a wheel or a specific area of the car or carbon fiber or something like that. Like 90% of my car shots are not a shot of the entire car in frame with a focus on the headlights. So again, super powerful feature, but you're probably going to have to turn it on and off a lot. So here is the secret. If you made it this far, as a bonus tip for you, go ahead and hit the FN button on the back of the camera. It's a function button. You're going to bring up even more custom settings, and you're going to tap and hold on any of these items for like 2 to 3 seconds. And now you've just shortcutted to the menu to be able to customize all of these, and you can configure them separately for photo and video. So I just set these up to be able to turn on and off the subject recognition in autofocus really quickly, because it's an amazing feature when you want it, and then you can quickly turn it on and off as you need. But this is just the beginning. Like there's so many crazy awesome features in this camera. So I will have more videos on the A7C II. Also, my favorite gear and everything like that for this camera is in the description, so you can check that out, as well as the menu guide. So if you want me to just walk you through all of these menu options, that document is available as well. So go check that out. I do have a ton of like BTS over on IG as well from all of my shoots, but definitely hit me up if you guys have any questions. Hope you guys are enjoying the A7C II. It's a really awesome camera. Enjoy it. Hope you guys are doing amazing, and I'll see you guys soon in a new video.